Hey, how's it going? So today we're gonna texture and render realistic skin in Blender. I'm gonna show you all of the necessary techniques to do so. I'm gonna create a diffuse map, the bump map, and also show you the shader for the skin. This tutorial is actually a bonus from the Sculpting for Beginners course that I did, and I'll add that in the link description below if you want to learn how to sculpt. That's the way to do it, and we'll talk more about it at the end of the video. But anyway,
Wait, hold up. Let's rewind.
in this video, I'm going to talk about the workflow that I went through to create the skin material. Keep in mind that when you're working with something complicated, such as skin or anything that you have never done before, it's always a good idea to start with something simple. So for example, in this case, start with a sphere instead of going to your character right away. Once you understand the idea behind creating skin, texturing, materials, and everything else, you can start working on your character. For starters, I would like to talk about the material and what's going on behind the scenes. So let's take a look at the beginning of the node setup over here. We got the texture. So this is what the texture looks like. I added all of the details. So, you know, the red colors, the blue colors, the moles, the pimples, everything is added with the textures. And I did that by hand. So it's a hand painted skin. Next, we got the bump map. So the bump map is a mix of two different maps, one for the pores and one for the, so this is the one for the pores, and then I have another one for, you know, scratches and stuff like pimples, moles, and other stuff, maybe bumps on the skin. It really adds that realism and that little something when you add all of these little details. So if I take a look at the end results right over here on the right, if I remove the texture, you can see over here we still got the subsurface look. That's because of the subsurface scattering shader over here, and we got all of the bumps going on as well, the nice glossiness, but obviously we're missing all of the color data. So I'm gonna put that back, and then I'm going to remove the bump map and show you what it looks like without any bump. So again, because of the subsurface scattering and all of the details in the texture, we're getting a nice result. However, it does look flat, so I'm gonna put back the bump, which is why it's really important to work with the bump map as well. All right, moving on, I'm gonna show you what it looks like without subsurface scattering. So this is the subsurface scattering shader over here, and if I add a diffuse shader instead of it, and I'll mix the, let's see, I'm gonna grab this, I'm gonna use the same layer weight as a factor, and I'm going to mix the glossy shader with the diffuse shader instead of the subsurface scattering shader. Actually, let me just take this one over here. So this one is with the subsurface scattering shader, and this one is without it. So as you can see over here, everything's looking really flat. You know, it looks really hard like a rock, and it just doesn't really look realistic. Now, so for some reason, we don't really see a lot of the bump map. That's because I forgot to add it over here to the socket. There you go. So you can't really tell the difference when you don't have subsurface scattering. So it's quite important. We're gonna go back to the final result. I'm going to delete this. Okay, once we are done with adding the texture and the bump map, oh, just a little note in case you guys didn't know, for the bump map, once you have the maps, you can just add a bump node, add the maps to the height, and then you can use the normal socket and enter it in all of the other nodes. So for example, the subsurface scattering node, the glossy node, even the layer weight. So without the bump node over here, the layer weight is going to look flat. So it's quite important to add it there as well. Okay, so the first part over here, I'm actually mixing the subsurface scattering with the glossy shader. I'm using the factor, the layer weight as a factor to basically tell the shader to take the glossiness into account when there is white, so the brighter values, and for the darker values, it's going to take more the subsurface scattering into account. Obviously, if I switch these two nodes over here, then it's going to be the opposite effect. So the next shader over here, well, actually, once we get to this point, that's basically what the shader looks like, what the material looks like. And the reason I went further is just because with the first setup that I did, on the sides right over here, the bump was still the glossiness, and it just, all of the bump over here, you're gonna see a lot of black spots showing up as you can see, and that's because we have a lot more glossiness going over here than the subsurface scattering. And I already showed you earlier when we mixed the diffuse shader with the glossy shader how we got this look, and it was just not pretty. So I added another mixed shader, mixing the result that I got with a little more subsurface scattering, as you can see over here, to smooth things out. And I played around finally with the roughness of the glossy shader. So this is the idea behind the material. Now a lot of people might use add-ons for subsurface scattering. I prefer creating my own setup because it really allows me to take complete control on what I'm creating. Okay, so I'm going to show you a quick demo on how to paint the diffuse and the bump maps as well. We're going to start with a sphere. So Shift A, Mesh UV Sphere, Tab U, Smart UV Project. Now you can create a proper unwrap. For this case, we don't really have to. Once you do that, open a UV image editor and then click New and create a map. Now I'm going to create it on 2K over here, so 2048 by 2048. You can increase it or decrease it, up to you. The higher the resolution, the better, well, the more amount of details you'll be able to add. And once you do that, name the file, okay, and then you can save them image by clicking at image save as, which I already did. And finally, we're going to open a node editor over here and create a new material. Once you do that, I'm gonna get closer. I know it's a bit small. Hopefully you guys can see what's going on. So we have the diffuse and material output, which is by default. And then we're going to create a texture map, a texture node. So Shift A, and then you can find it. If you have the add-on node wrangler activated, you could just grab the diffuse shader, hit the Control T button, and then it'll take out a full setup for the textures. Once you do that, you can look for the texture that you saved. So for the diffuse, it's going to be tutorial skin diffuse in my case. And once you do that, once you finish, you can change to material. So this basically allows us to see what's going on in the material with whatever we grab. So I'm going to grab the image texture with Control Shift, and again make sure that the add-on node wrangler is activated so that you could do that. And once you are finished, we will start painting. So let's see, we're gonna go to the texture paints over here, and we are going to hit the T button, go to fill, and finally we're going to choose the colors. So for the skin, really depends on the skin you're going for. I'm gonna start with a base color of something like this. So something bright and yellowish or orange, an orange kind of color. So this sounds good. I'm going to create a gradient palette. So over here, click New. And once you do that, you can just hit the plus button. It will add the color. I'm going to add a bright, or maybe a bit dark. Yeah, there you go. This is a good red color. There you go. So I'm going to add that, whoops, over here, the plus button. I'm going to add a bluish color, or a dark one around here. If you don't know what I'm doing, you need to understand how the skin works. And you can do this in a lot of different ways, depending on what kind of skin result you want. But for now, I'm gonna go with the method that I used to create this sphere. So I'm gonna hit the add button. I'm gonna go for a neutral color, so something to lighten things up. I'm gonna take the base color and make it just closer to the white, so less saturated. And then I'm going to add it over here, and maybe even a darker red color, just in case we need that. So something like that would be good. Let's see. Yep. There you go. So we have a nice palette going on over here. I'm going to take the base color and fill up the sphere as such. And once we do that, actually I'm going to go for a more saturated color, just a bit more. Perfect. So I'm going to fill it up. And then I'm going to work with the texture draw brush. Okay, so you need to understand a little of the options over here. So the texture map is going to really help out. Now I'm using an alpha for skin pores. You can go to Google and try to find one. I can't really provide this one because it's not mine. Hopefully in the future I'll create my own and provide it to you guys, but just go to ZBrush Central or any other website, look for some alpha maps, and it will really speed up the process. So I basically just added it by going over here, new brush, and then once you do that, you can just look for the image. Okay, and we're going down. Okay, so for the mask mapping, I'm going to use view plane. I'm not gonna go into details on what each option does because, you know, it's not really a tutorial for that, but I think I did a video on that on my channel. I can't really remember which video. Anyways, not gonna go into details in this video concerning that. I think for the stroke, yeah, there you go. So I went for anchored for the pores, but since we're texturing right now and we're not doing the bump map, we'll get back to that later on. We're going to use the space. Now the space is what you have by default, I believe. We're gonna play around with the spacing. So the higher the spacing, you're gonna get something. There you go. Okay, that's a bit too big. We're gonna go down to maybe 50. And as you can see, there's some spacing going on between each texture stroke. Now I want to keep the space at 5. I think by default it's at 10. And the jittering, I'm going to increase it, which will add randomness to maybe 0.5. And once you do that, another thing you need to take into account is the curve. So the way the brush is affecting the surface. So this is by default, it's really smooth. You can make it harsh. You can really play around with the curves, which I'll be doing a bit when we get into, I believe, the bump maps. So for now, I'm going to keep it as it is, and then I'm going to play around with the strength. So for the strength, I'm going to decrease it, take the red color, and then you want to you want to softly just add some texture over here. As you can see, it's really adding some nice dots, and that's quite important so that it doesn't feel too flat. To do that, and then you want to add more red colors, maybe even make it a bit brighter. There you go, around areas like the nose, the cheek, stuff like that. And you really want to go smooth with this. Don't go crazy, otherwise it'll look really weird. And if you do go crazy, you can always grab the base color with S, and then you can basically smooth things out and just add texture over it with the base color. Okay, once that is done, we're going to take the blue color, and again, the blue is going to be dark, so, you know, places like around the chin. You can add it all around the face if you're going really softly with it, maybe under the eyes a bit, depends on the skin type. So a really soft stroke. I could even decrease the strength over here for the blue color and do that. And once I'm done, I can go back to the base color. You could use the base color and just soften things up, or use something even brighter to really neutralize the color and make it look a bit more natural. Again, it depends on the part of the face, so the nose, mouth, forehead. You know, forehead that has a little yellow into it. Like, the skin is really complex, and the best thing you can do is get a lot of reference and just try to understand it. And don't go for photoshopped reference. So usually female models is a bad idea because, you know, there's a lot of makeup and a lot of Photoshop going on, which really removes from the appeal of the details, and it makes everything too soft, which is not good. Okay, so I'm going to add back some reddish colors. There you go. And I'm really going for a really quick job over here just to show you guys how it's going. I spent a little more time with the original one over here. And once that is done, I actually went back in and added some freckles, some moles, stuff like that. So I went to a really dark color. I'm gonna add it to the palette. And I increased the strength, I believe, went down to the stroke, anchored, and then I basically just added some freckles over here. So I'm gonna decrease the strength, and yeah, some freckles, some imperfections, and then from time to time I'd play around with the strength and get some interesting shapes, interesting things going on. There you go. And then once I'm done, I could decrease the brush size. I'm going to keep the alpha, it gives some nice texture. you don't really have to remove it. I'm going to go back to space, maybe even get rid of the jittered over here. We don't really need it. And then I could like add some mole color over here, just like the one over here, and maybe a darker one. So you could really be creative with this. Do whatever you want. I'm going to increase the strength. And there you go. You could do stuff like that. All right. And for the pimples, you can go for a bright red. Boop. And maybe add some quick pimples or some, you know, reddish zones in the face. Imperfections is very important when creating a character or anything else. Really adds to the appeal. There you go. So we're gonna, yeah, we got something close to what we got over here. Obviously here I spent a lot more time, so I got a more refined result, but this will give you the idea on how to texture the skin. Once you're done, make sure to save the image by going to the button over here, save image or Alt S, so that you don't lose all of the work that you did if Blender crashes or if you open a new file scene without saving the texture. I also noticed that the original sphere has the final material node selected, so to better compare the textures between both of these spheres, I'm going to select the image texture, and as you can see, it's actually quite similar, which is pretty cool. Anyways, let's move on and go to the bump map. To better visualize the bump map in the viewport, we're going to use the glossy shader right over here. There you go, perfect. Because if we had the diffuse shader, things are going to be blasted out and we won't really be able to tell what's going on. Just to demonstrate, this is what the diffuse shader looks like with the bump map. So let's stick to the glossy one. And in this case, it will be a good idea to have the texture or the diffuse information with us. So I'm going to maximize this with the Shift space button. And then I'm going to enter the texture socket to the glossy color, just so that we can see what's going on in the viewport, and add things like the little details over here. See, I got the mole going outwards a bit. If we don't have the texture information, I won't be able to tell where to add these bumps. So I'm going to do the same for the sphere we're working on. Make sure you create a new image. So again, simple, new. I'm going to use 2048 by 2048 pixels. Name it, and once you're done, just save it. Since I already did that, I'm going to open the texture over here. So it's going to be a flat black color. Once we do that, I'm going to go to the nodes of this object, which I believe is already opened. Yep. I'm going to create a glossy shader, a bump node, and Control T to create the texture nodes behind it. Once I do that, make sure that the texture is in the height and not the strength, and then put the bump socket into the normal one in the glossy shader. There you go. So that's what it's supposed to look, because we got no information for the moment. And once we do that, I'm going to save. Okay, so I'm going to go to over here, add the texture for the bump map. And then I'm going to switch from object mode to texture paint. I'm going to remove the palette, which you can always access again. Create a new one. We need the black color, the white color, and finally the gray color. So 0.5, 0.5, 0.5, there you go. Going to add it. I'm going to switch to the fill and make sure that when you fill it, you go to the options. I think by default the bleed will be 2. And if you do that, let me just get closer and fill it up. You're going to see all of the seams going on. So hopefully you can see it on the screen. And that's where the UV unwrapping happened. So make sure that you increase the bleed to a number that allows you to go out of the borders but not past the neighbor borders. So maybe in my case 15 would be a good number. It's actually adding color, so I might have forgotten to choose the gray color. Perfect. So I'm going to do it again at 15. Fill. which is good. I could maybe even increase it to 20 just in case. There you go. Looks like everything's working perfectly. Once you get that done, we're going to start adding the bump. If you have any artifacts like this, just apply it again to remove it. Then I'm going to switch to texture draw. So anything I paint with black will have the illusion that's going inwards. Let me just test it out. There you go. And right now I have the texture activated, so I'm going to remove that and test it again. And anything that is painted with white, we're gonna have the impression that's going outwards, which is pretty cool. So for the pores, we're going to want to use primarily black, and then we're gonna play around with the curves in a moment. So first things first, I'm going to choose the alpha for the pores, and then I'm going to go for anchored. Let me try this out. Ooh, looking really nice. As you can see, I'm easily adding pores this way. It's a bit too strong for my taste, so maybe 0.5. That's nice. So we can add a few pores this way, and then we can play around with the size. And just keep in mind that the face has a lot of different imperfections, so you won't just add pores everywhere. You'd probably have more pores around the nose, bigger ones, and around the cheeks, and maybe some scar-like or wrinkles around the neck, forehead, stuff like that. So just make sure to have a reference or a lot of reference around you when you're working with skin. For the purpose of this tutorial, I'm just going to stick with pores, as you can see over here. I did forget to do one thing, and that is to add the color information, which I'll easily do by adding the socket over here. There you go, perfect. So now we can find all of the moles and other stuff that we could use to our advantage when working with the bump map. Okay, so next I'm going to add these scars. Now in my original sphere, I added them with a separate texture. I'm not gonna do that over here, just to get things done a little faster. So for these scars, probably going to want to play around with the curve, because by default, if I try to create a scar over here, whoops, let me just change the anchored to space. There you go. So if I try to do that, the curve is just not right for a scar. It doesn't look natural. If you want it to look more natural, maybe play around with the dots over here. If you don't know how to use the curve, well, over here, as you can see, the small icons, they represent what the curve would look like. Over here, the brush. So just imagine that this is the tip of the brush. So a flat one is a flat brush. This one over here, it continues to the other side and creates that smooth look. And finally, we want something that looks like this for the wrinkles or scars. That looks a lot better. And then we can always go to soften and soften things up if you need to, or smear if you want to pull it out a bit. There you go. And make it look more natural. Perfect. Looks really nice. So this can be used for scars, for wrinkles, for anything really. And then once you add a lot of these, depending on the part of the face, you can go to texture draw again. I'm going to go to anchored, maybe a smooth brush. And then I'm going to maybe add some, I don't know, imperfections, part of the skins that goes inwards, maybe scars, right? You can play around with the strength, maybe increase it. There you go. That's a bit too much. And we can use the white color to push the skin out. So maybe for the mole, that's maybe a bit too much. Let's put it back to 0.35. There you go. So that's actually looking really nice. As you can see, it's looking quite believable. Gonna pull this one out a bit. Actually, no. I'm going to pull out the pimple. That's a bit too strong. Again, we can decrease it for the pimple, maybe 0.1. Yeah, looking better. See, just be subtle about things and it'll look much better. So that's about it for the bump map. Once that is done, just make sure to save the image over here. So Alt S if you got the mouse hovered around this UV image editor, and it will save the image. Now that we're done with all of the important textures, let's find out if I wasted your time by trying them out on the new sphere. So first of all, I'm going to get some more space by getting rid of the UV image editor, and then I'm going to grab the new sphere, check out the name of the material setup that I already explained in the beginning of the video, and I'm going to use the same one for the new sphere. Once I do that, I'm going to click on the plus button to create a duplicate of it and make changes without affecting the original sphere. So here I'm going to switch the textures with the new ones that we created. So texture tutorial skin diffuse, and for the bump one it is called tutorial skin bump. Perfect. Now in the previous one I had two bump textures. In this case I don't, so I'm going to mute these nodes that we don't need anymore. Basically, this is no longer used for this one. Actually, I can just delete them so that you guys don't get confused. There you go. Perfect. And then I'm going to go to the last shader, if it will allow me. Perfect. And I'm going to do the same for the original one as well. Save. Okay, so the moment of truth. Let's check out the difference between the old and the new sphere. I'm going to render them side by side so that we can better see what's going on. So this is the old one, the original sphere. That's the one I showed you at the beginning of the video. As you can see, really nice colors going on. We got a lot of details as well. It's looking overall really good. Nice amount of shine, gloss, and pimples and everything else. Okay, let's take a look at this one. And here we go. Ooh, that's actually looking really cool. You can definitely play around with the values of the glossiness, but this is actually a lot better than I thought it would be, you know, considering the amount of work we put into it. Now the video might be a bit long, but a lot of it is me explaining things. If you take into account just the amount of work we put into it, that's actually a really good, a decent result from all of the work that we did. So over here, there are some few stuff that I actually prefer over the old sphere. For example, the pores are a lot more visible, and that's probably because I used a higher strength when painting the bump, and the mole is a lot more visible as well. Over here I went really soft with the color, and here I really popped it out, which is really nice. It's really giving realism to the skin. Now you could definitely use a mix between both, maybe add different kind of moles. Over here we got these three bumps, actually not bumps, but you know, it's going inwards, so 3 holes, 3 imperfections that are looking a bit too repetitive. So I think we could get rid of 2 or maybe change the sizes. This is the only thing that I don't like about this sphere over here, and you can definitely go back to the texture paint and just remove it, save the image and render it out again, and it will look perfect. And finally, we got this really nice car, so always think of adding a lot of imperfections, add some story to your renders, and this is looking really awesome. I'm actually quite happy with the result. If you guys enjoyed the tutorial, then you will definitely enjoy the full course with the exclusive contents that I'm putting up on my Gumroad and giving to my patrons. If you're interested, make sure you get it as soon as possible so that you don't miss out. In the full course, you're gonna get a 3-part package. So for the first part, you're gonna get an introduction to sculpting in Blender. In that package, you're gonna get the blend files, the OBJ files, you're gonna get the tutorials that I'm putting out here on YouTube. And in addition to that, you're gonna get 1 hour of videos, so tutorials on sculpting, tips, tricks, and advice, and finally the Blender theme that I'm currently using. The second part of the package is going to be about sculpting a stylized male face. So you're gonna get the full recording of 3 hours of me sculpting the character, the blend files, the OBJ files, materials, textures, everything that comes with the character, the high-res renders, and obviously the tutorial that I'm also sharing on YouTube, which is 1 hour and 30 minutes of real-time sculpting with commentary. The final one is a bonus package, which is part 3, texturing and rendering the skin in Blender. Yes, you heard it right. I'm gonna show you how to texture and render the skin in Blender, a full tutorial of 30 minutes. I'm gonna take you through the material that I created for the skin, the subsurface scattering, and I'll also show you in real time how to texture the diffuse for the skin and how to texture the bump map for the skin. The best part is all of that will be hand painted, so I'm gonna show you tips and tricks on how to do that. Hope you guys enjoyed the video, learned a thing or two. You know how it is. If you follow the tutorial, send me your results on Twitter. My Twitter is in the link in the description below. Everything is in the link in the description below. You guys know how it is. If you enjoyed the video, like it, subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you guys real soon.